Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today we want to talk about Ubiquiti and a story that is bubbling to the surface right now regarding UniFi products for the most part and Hunterbrook Media, and a report that this organisation put together detailing what they back up, or they're backing up as their claims and their allegations that Ubiquiti products are largely available and shipping their way through into Russia, thereby breaking embargoes and trade sanctions that have been put in place. Now, again, these are all allegations that are being made by this organisation. It's really been made a great deal louder, I would say, due to a video over here from Pablo Torre Finds Out, 45-minute video that goes into a lot more of this evidence here. We will be returning to this article later on. But ultimately, the allegations being made at this point are not that Ubiquiti is selling goods to Russia. That is not the claim that's being made here. The claim that's being made is that goods from Ubiquiti on a large scale are being used by Russians in their military efforts and also being just widely available in Russia, despite, again, sanctions and trade embargoes. Allegations are also being made here that Ubiquiti is not really controlling, with veracity the third-party sales network of these products in Russia, and that extends, by the way, to distributors that are being listed there with their own very, very similar branding. Now, Hunterbrook allege that they have got information with regards to trade and shipment data, and this part of the allegation comes down to them suggesting that Ubiquiti is not making enough of an effort to stamp down on these official-looking storefronts there, and ultimately these goods are still being distributed through third-party networks, such as going through Turkey and Kazakhstan, for these goods to make their way into Russia. That said, these are still allegations, and we have to acknowledge a few things. Number one, some of the sources that this information has come from is pretty ambiguous. It is Russian forums. It has got documentation which, again, how far verification can be made outside of this report, we'll have to see. Secondly, it's pretty important to acknowledge that Hunterbrook Media is part of Hunterbrook Capital. They deal with security, shares, etc. And one might argue it would be very much in their interest to perhaps harm Ubiquiti's stock, to short the stock. And I think that is, let's face it, what is the main motivators for this? It doesn't mean that these allegations are untrue. It doesn't mean that these allegations are not founded in some way. But I think we have to acknowledge that there is a motivation here. This wouldn't be the first time we've seen a media report that some primary motivation was designed to short stock. One of the great examples here that we found online is the Hindenburg research report that ultimately was designed to short some stock. So we can't discount that motivation potential there. That said, we have to acknowledge that Ubiquiti did get caught up in something similar to this way back in 2014 during a civil prosecution that they settled on for a little over $500,000 there. And this was to do with their goods being found available in Iran during similar sanctions and embargoes. Again, it was detailed, and they did sell there. So what was it, $504,000 there. Circling back to those allegations and moving beyond the alleged social media posts and forum posts, we can talk about one of the other details in this report where they say that a reporter posed as a member of the Russian military complex and then from there reached out to both official and non-official distributors and resellers in order to get hold of Ubiquiti equipment. And they highlighted several different organizations where that was successful. Again, this is all alleged, this is all based on their report, but this is one of the examples in where that redistribution and working through the likes of Turkey and Kazakhstan to get goods around that embargo. A crucial detail is all of this is about those third-party distributors, those distributors that may or may not be dealing under the Ubiquiti brand there. And that's the key point. This isn't about Ubiquiti selling direct to Russia, therefore violating an embargo or a sanction. This is about the goods making their way into these countries and the alleged lack of care that this report is stating that UniFi, or I should say Ubiquiti, has made in stamping this out. One thing that I think is a little bit more sizzle than it is sausage is some of the reporting with regards to Russian news clips on there. I will say, you know, it looks like a Ubiquiti product on there, and it probably is a Ubiquiti product on there, but that doesn't mean a violation of trade embargoes. I'm sure there's plenty of goods in Russia that are available from brands that aren't trying to violate any kind of embargo or trade sanction there. Just because a truck pulls up outside the Kremlin full of Kellogg's cornflakes, it doesn't mean that Kellogg's has violated sanctions. This is about the distribution afterwards and those resellers, and questions that a report like this raises, whether, if these claims are true, whether Ubiquiti is doing a good enough job on staying on top of that distribution. Numerous other organisations are alleged to have provided Ubiquiti equipment and are detailed in this report. Again, we've got to keep saying alleged. We've got to say this is really just this report pointing at Ubiquiti, and Ubiquiti will no doubt put a statement out on this in due course. I know it's probably super annoying that I keep saying alleged, and a number of you are probably screaming at the screen, look, all the evidence is there, how can you keep saying alleged? Well, we can only go on what this report says, and here's an example. When they detail that Multi-Link Solutions, they're based in Ohio, was reached out to ship 450 Ubiquiti devices to Russia, they provided this audio.
You can ship to Moscow too, no problem.
And again, that's just 2 seconds of that larger conversation, which immediately afterward, they detail how they did follow up afterwards that they weren't able to ship these goods to Russia after all. But they allege that this company then reached out to give them solutions on ways to get around it via Turkey. So there's this structure of this article is very hard hitting, but the narrative on there is pretty strong. That said, these allegations, they show their workings. They do show their workings most of the time with the other different distributors that they have covered there. Ultimately, this is going to be something that Ubiquiti are going to have to address, because, you know, it's not even been a day at this point and this story is running around all over the place. And because of that civil prosecution that happened in 2014, unfortunately, that is going to throw in some people's minds doubt at Ubiquiti on this. And I think Ubiquiti, at the very least, needs to stand up and either defend their distribution system here, or at least talk about and take apart the arguments that they believe to be false, if that is indeed the case. Another thing that is detailed both in this report and was covered in that 45-minute video is to do with why can't Ubiquiti just disable these devices remotely? And I think most people would agree, would you want a company to be able to do that to the hardware you purchase, regardless of where you are in the world? I think that might be a slippery slope there. I understand why it could be beneficial, but I don't think I would like that in my hardware, and I think most of us in our hearts wouldn't want that. That isn't to say that Ubiquiti are sitting on their hands here. Based on, again, this is in that same article, they allege, based on reports found in Russian user forums. So crucially, remember that this isn't Ubiquiti themselves, suggesting that there are complaints on there that there was IP-based bans on firmware updates. And of course, that would have been handled on the Ubiquiti side of things. That's something they most definitely have control over there. So again, if that is true, that is at least a step in the right direction here, you know, in the broader scope of these allegations. Do you remember last year when we spoke with Heist.D regarding those Seagate drives that are having their firmware tweaked, the ex-Chia farming cryptocurrency drives that are being resold as new? Again, that wasn't Seagate doing that. It was their partners that were getting caught doing that, and that distribution, and a hole in the distribution that was being exploited there. This isn't quite like that if what is being alleged here is true. This is about the brand not being hard enough on its supply chain and potentially having knowledge of this and not acting on that. But again, it's still too early to say, and these are still allegations being made by this report against Ubiquiti themselves, who have still yet to respond. That said, I really, really hope Ubiquiti respond to this relatively soon, because it has been just shy of a day. I think it's like 22, 23 hours since this dropped, and it has been picked up by a lot of different outlets. Again, a lot of them share linked, a lot of them to do with securities, a lot of them to do with arguably what Hunterbrook is one of the motivators, I would argue, in that reporting. But again, that's just my opinion. I think we can all acknowledge that The proposition in terms of the portfolio from Ubiquiti is fairly unique in terms of its price point versus the hardware, the capability, just generally the usability of UniFi products from Ubiquiti. And therefore, you can kind of understand why there would be this demand and potentially the risk from these alleged distributors to violate those sanctions, or at the very least bend those rules. Remember, this is not about Ubiquiti selling to sanctioned regions and countries. The allegation here is about distribution networks running all the way around and how much Ubiquiti either know about that or don't know about that. But that's really it. It has been less than a day at the time of recording since this report first arrived, and I'm sure Ubiquiti will respond because, let's face it, it's moving fast. And I know the majority of the news reporting I've seen has been related to news outlets, for the most part, not all, but for the most part, linked to that of share pricing, equities and more. But I will say it's moving fast and people are clearly drawing battle lines. You can't have a brand that has such an avid user base that to not immediately take sides really, really quickly. And again, they're detailed. People are forming opinions, forming camps, and this is only going to make a news story like this get even louder outside of those stocks and share circles. So Ubiquiti, please do respond to this publicly. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you on the next video.